Welcome to the Story of Liberty. This is your host, John Bona. Hi, Jenna.
How you doing today?
And with us today is David Barton. Thank you for joining us, David.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's great. Many of you know David Barton. He's the founder and president of WallBuilders. It's a national pro-life, pro-family organization that really presents America's forgotten history. And David, I really appreciate what you've done. You were doing this. How long have you been doing this?
We started probably in about 87, so I guess 25 years or so.
And I know you've had a lot of emphasis on our moral and religious and constitutional heritage. And you've written, how many books have you written?
I don't know. My office tells me it's somewhere over 40, but I don't even keep track.
Wow. Well, I think I read your first book. It was back in the 80s, I think, or maybe the early 90s.
Yeah, 88, I think, is when our first book came out.
Yeah, and that really inspired me. When I read that book, like millions of other people, I got inspired about our founding heritage, and it helped me understand things better.
Yeah, it's fun. There's so much good history back there that's gotten away from all of us. I mean, I went through school not being a history person. I was a math and science person. But I came to a point where that I read two really old documents that I had been taught about in school. But when I read the documents, they were totally different from what I'd been taught about those documents in school. And so I'm sitting there saying, now, wait a minute, here's what I was taught, but I'm seeing this in my own eyes. And at that point, we started collecting historical documents and found so many more discrepancies with what was being taught. And so now we do own about 100,000 documents from before 1812. So we got all these handwritten documents by Washington, Jefferson, Adams, and thousands of documents in black history and church history and constitutional history and judicial history and military history and you name it. So it's been really fun because there is so much good stuff back there, but we just flat have not taught it and actually taught the opposite since about World War II.
Well, I know that. I remember when Kirk Cameron interviewed you for our film Monumental, you showed that library on the your private library on the film, and it was incredible to see that you have a lot of the original documents. Yeah,
we do. We've been very, very, very blessed. We've got just so many cool things that, came right from the hands of the Founding Fathers, a lot of their own belongings, possessions as well, so a lot of artifacts that kind of, it's just fun. We have school groups going through all the time, tours all the time, looking at it, and so we're able to pull out stuff, and it's kind of fun that when 7, 8-year-old kids can hold a rifle that was used in the American Revolution, and that rifle's 1.5 times taller than they are. It's fun for them to imagine and connect, and you find out that, hey, the Founding Fathers were real people, and here's some stuff that they had, some stuff that they wore, and stuff that they used, and so it's just fun to get people reconnected to our history.
Oh, that's great. I got to get out there sometime.
I think you'd love it.
I had the pleasure of I guess it was an email forwarded to me by WallBuilders, by your organization, and which is this grassroots movement that's really, I think, strengthened the moral fiber of several cities and towns in America in general. You recently wrote an article, detailing what President Obama has already done against the Christian faith, is the way I would say it, really against Christ and his teachings during his past 4 years of his administration. Boy, I took that article to heart. I just wanted to say to our listeners before you begin to explain some of your article, and I realize in our short time frame we'll probably only go over a tenth of it. But as I read this and studied it, it makes issues perfectly clear. And it really holds your feet to the fire as a Christian. I mean, if you read this and you're a Christian, your feet are held to the fire. There's no excuse anymore. Now, what I'm saying is, if you're a professing Christian, let me say this real clear. If you're a professing Christian and you vote for somebody, and in this case it's President Obama, who stands for abortion, gay marriage, and a host of other things we're going to go through, you're denying your Christian faith. Because why? Because Christians are to vote for those most likely to govern according to God's stated laws and principles. That's outlined in Holy Scripture. So if that's the standard we use, then there is no honest, sincere person, a Christian, who could vote for Obama. Now, let me just say two obvious issues. Number one, Everybody knows it's a matter of public record. The president has said it publicly. He supports and endorses abortion. Of course, they'll cloak it in the phrase of pro-choice or something like that, but it's abortion. It's the killing of an unborn child. Secondly, he came out and supported gay marriage. Now, both of those things go against Scripture. They go against a God-ordained family. Those are not small things. Those aren't little things that when all of us are going to stand before God at judgment and think we're going to get away with it just because it was a small thing to us. They're major things to God. The killing of an unborn child, going against a family that he has predestined, the God-ordained family of a husband and wife and children. Now, what I'm saying is there isn't any candidate, including President Obama, that should receive a single vote from any true Christian. These two issues alone, you're going to hear a lot of other issues here in the next 40 minutes. These two issues alone totally disqualify him from receiving a single vote from any Christian. Now, I don't care. It doesn't matter whether you're a black Christian, white, red, Hispanic, you're in college, you're skinny, you're fat, you're tall, you're short, you're young, you're old. It doesn't matter. You no longer have any excuse. And you'll be held accountable. You'll be held accountable because voting is a Christian duty. It's not only a privilege, it's a duty, right? Christ said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. That's a command of God. And so you know what a sin is? When you break a command of God, that's a sin. So you have to vote. So David, I'd like you to, if you can, please explain some of your research. And I know you're only going to have time maybe for about a tenth of it in that great article you wrote on WallBuilders.com that you could find this great article and spend some time and research through it. Could you kind of walk us through some of that?
Yeah, let me do that. And let me kind of set the background in two ways here. We called the article America's Most Biblically Hostile U.S. President. But there's a lot of stuff that we did not touch in this article that would be relevant to that title. And here's the reason I say that, because when you go back in history, you go back to the writings, for example, of Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson on economic issues. When you go back to the writings of the Pilgrims on private property issues, etc., they all gave biblical reasons for why that we have certain aspects of our culture. I mean, I don't think most Americans today, much less most Christians, could name the 5 Bible verses on which the free market economic system was historically based. But there are 5 very clear Bible verses, and the founders knew those and talked about those. And in the same way, when you look at educational choice, which is the way the Founding Fathers did schools, they didn't do the government education we do now. They do educational choice. When you look at the rights of conscience, they cited over 30 New Testament verses to protect the rights of conscience. So all of these rights that we have come out of the Bible. Quite frankly, the due process clauses, the 4th through the 8th Amendment, there is a great piece in the federal law books, what's called the Federal Practice and Procedure, over 100 pages talking about how the Bible is what shaped the 4th through the 8th Amendments. Well, today people don't know that. So when I say America's most biblically hostile president, I could say, well, you know, in being biblically hostile, we see that because he's opposed to the free market economic system, which is a biblical derivative. He's opposed to all the things that are going on with the rights of conscience. So I've never seen an attack on rights of conscience in 238 years of American history like we're seeing now, but that's biblically based. And when you look at educational choice, that's biblically based. I can show you the passages on it. So it's very possible to say, you know, biblically hostile president, he's also going after the institutions that were formed by the Bible, but we didn't do that in the piece. We really stuck with more overt religious expression type of things. And the second caveat that I would throw in to kind of help explain this piece is that I believe that President Obama is a perfect reflection of his personal denomination. For 20 years, he's a member of the United Church of Christ. That is a denomination of 1.2 million members. And that denomination, as a denomination, back in 1967, went on record as a denomination calling for abortion on demand. Now, that's 7 years before Roe v. Wade.
Wow.
So here's a denomination calling for abortion on demand 7 years before Roe v. Wade. In 1976, as a denomination, they went on record calling for same-sex marriage. Nobody was thinking same-sex marriage in 1976. As you look at them as a denomination, they have 200 of their ministers who are openly gay ministers. No other denomination comes close to that. So as you look at it, you would have to say, well, that may be a Christian denomination, United Church of Christ, but it's certainly not a biblical denomination. Matter of fact, even on their website, when you go to the website for United Church of Christ, they say, yeah, the Bible's a great book if you want to live by it, but really no reason to, because it's not really inspired. There's nothing specific about it. It's just a guidebook, and if you want to use it, you're welcome to. So you take that belief system that for 20 years, that's the church that he voluntarily chose to attend, and what you see in his public policy is a great reflection of the beliefs that he has in that church, and he must have been comfortable with them because he attended there for 20 years. And so that's what you start seeing. And so we can talk about his overt biblical hostility, but it's there not only in religious areas, it's there in areas of conscience, and his overwhelming support for gay marriage and his opposition to life. He's done 231 acts as President of the United States to help promote abortion, not life. And he said he wanted abortion to be rare. Not so. So those are things we could point to that we did not include in the article. So that's just a bigger caveat. We just took the narrow thing of just his expressions of biblical faith in the sense of what we would call religious expressions. So that's part of the background.
Right. Oh, I appreciate that. And I know he comes right out and says he supports and endorses abortion. I mean, and as a Christian, protecting the innocent and preserving life, I mean, it permeates the pages of the Bible. It's a major theme of the Bible. And go ahead.
It's not only a major theme of the Bible, but this is another interesting thing about our history, because a lot of folks, the Bible literally says there's nothing new under the sun. And that's true. And I have books on abortion in our library from back on 1808. I mean, the Founding Fathers were talking about abortion in their day. The Seventh Amendment to the Constitution, the clause incorporates the common law. The ban on abortion is incorporated in the Seventh Amendment of the Constitution. The Founding Fathers put it there. That's part of the common law. So abortion is not a new issue in any way, shape, fashion, or form. I mean, they have written about this, and the Bible has been clear on it a long time before the Founding Fathers were, but the Founding Fathers got their ideas out of the Bible, and they specifically cite that. One of the great examples is when you look at the law books of James Wilson, and James Wilson is one of only 6 Founding Fathers who signed the Declaration and the Constitution. He's the second most active member of the Constitutional Convention. He's one of the master builders of the Constitution. But he's put on the original U.S. Supreme Court by George Washington. And on the Supreme Court, he started America's first law school and wrote the law books for the law school. I have his original law books. And he tells the students that when it comes to life, life begins at the time that we know there's life in the womb. He says, as soon as you know there's life in the womb, by the law, that life is protected. And he goes on to explain, now, this is where technology is different, because back then it took weeks to know that you had life in the womb. But today we can know within days or hours. But the point was, as soon as you know there's life, it is protected by the common law, the Seventh Amendment to the Constitution. So he taught that. We knew that. We understood that. The Bible is filled with that, and the Founding Fathers talked about it. And I love the way they explained it. They said, look, God gives life, not government. Government doesn't give it. Therefore, since God gives it, one of the purposes of government is to protect inalienable rights. We say that in the Declaration. So since God gives life, that's why government has to protect it from the time we know there's life there, which, inception, conception, whatever, from the time we know there's life, it's got to be protected. And John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration, great point. He said that's the difference between Europe and America. He says in Europe, they think it's parents that give life to babies. He said in America, we know it's God that gives life to babies. That's why in Europe they allow them to abort babies, because they think parents give life. Over here in America, we know that God gives life. That's why you can't do abortions in America. So even the issue of the president being so strong on abortion, that's one of the reasons we say he's not biblical. I'm not going to say he's not Christian. I mean, I'm not the one that judges that, but I can tell you that he is definitely not biblical by that position, because I can take the Bible and lay it out there. I can use Jeremiah 1, I can use Luke 1, I can use Psalm 139, and go through all the passages where the Bible talks about this, and that's why we can say he's really not biblical, and particularly on the issue of life. But again, I just love throwing out the fact that this is not a new issue in American history. And, Roe v. Wade changed our policy on it, But we've been dealing with abortion for well over 200 years in America.
Right, and obviously we will know them by their fruits. I think Obama has probably become the most pro-abortion president ever.
And you know what's really cool is we now have the most pro-life Congress ever. In the last election, the 2010 election, we had a higher Christian voter turnout than any previous recorded modern election. Evangelical turnout normally is 24%. It rose to 37%, or it rose to 30%. And of the 97 freshmen we elected to Congress, 81 of them were pro-life members of Congress. That's the largest freshman pro-life class we've ever had. Of the 16 U.S. senators we elected 2 years ago, 13 of the 16 are pro-life. And that's the greatest pro-life freshman group we've had in the Senate. So what you've seen is there's been a huge shift. And even the Gallup poll that's out right now says that in this coming election, 47% of Americans say they will cast their vote in this election based on the candidate's stand on the abortion issue. We haven't seen, back in 2002, it was at 42%. But here we are at a presidential election, we're talking 47%. I mean, this is an issue for people. The Gallup polls now, and other polls as well, by the way, show that we're the largest pro-life numbers in America since they began keeping polling nearly 30 years ago on life issues. So this really is a pro-life culture and a pro-life country, and the president is completely out of touch with that. As a matter of fact, only 14% of the nation agrees with his positions on abortion. So he is completely out of touch, and that's part of his campaign. And the convention they had was kind of like an abortion celebration, with Planned Parenthood and NARAL and all those folks speaking, and that is so far out of touch with where people are. But I mean, again, you're right. This is a position he takes as a Christian, or at least he calls himself a Christian, but it's not a biblical position. And that's where I have really learned to change my language. I no longer talk about people being Christians. I talk about whether they're biblical or not, because there's a ton of Christians out there who don't line up with what the Bible says.
Right. If a person believes in the inerrant word of the Bible, and you faithfully follow God's word, you couldn't cast a vote for your mother if she was running for office for abortion.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
And we have Obama on the record saying that he was even for partial birth abortion, which is a whole other extreme level of this.
I am pro-choice.
In all situations, including the late-term thing?
I am pro-choice.
Well, we have been going further than that, and he was against the Infant Born Alive Protection Act.
That's right.
As a senator in Illinois, if a kid's born alive but was supposed to have been aborted, you can go ahead and kill it after it's born, even if it's alive.
Yeah, that's
now
unbelievable.
We're talking outside the womb, and that's infanticide. That is nothing but pure D murder. That is infanticide, and he's on record supporting that and voting against anything to protect a child from being killed after it's born, and that's unbelievable.
Unmerciful. It's just disdainful. I'm loss of words. How somebody.
Well, it's a lack of conscience, which may explain his antipathy toward conscience. Because here I am. I happen to be a Protestant Christian, but you know what? I'm patriotic. I love the country. I love saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I love the fact that states have passed laws on that. But I'm going to go to the mat for the right of Jehovah's Witnesses not to say the Pledge of Allegiance, because in their belief, you don't pledge allegiance to anybody but God. You don't do it to the country. And in the same way, when I look at education in America, we got 12 years compulsory education, but I'll go to the mat for the right of the Amish to say, no, only 8 years. Our faith teaches us only 8 years. I'll do the same. Kids have to get vaccinations for school, but I'll go to the mat for the right of Christian Scientists not to have their kids vaccinated, because that's against their religious beliefs. So there's a lot of things I accommodate, not because I agree with them, but because I agree that they don't answer to me for their beliefs. They answer to God. But here you've got a president who says, I don't care what your beliefs are on abortion. I don't care what your beliefs are on contraception. I don't care if you answer to God for it. I'm telling you, you're going to answer to me, and you're going to do this. And then we even had the gay marriage that happened out at Fort Polk, Louisiana, a federal installation, and gay marriage can't happen on military bases. We still have the DOMA law in effect on military bases. The courts have not struck that down. It still is a federal statute. And so we had a gay marriage on a military base. It can't happen. And so what happened was Todd Aiken, part of the Armed Services Committee, came forward in his subcommittee with a bill that says we're being told, the chaplains are being told they have to perform gay marriages on military bases, even if their faith won't allow them to do that, even if their conscience says they can't. And so he came out with a bill to protect the rights of conscience for chaplains not to be forced to perform gay weddings against their beliefs. And the president sent a letter over and said, if you pass that bill, I'll veto it. Those chaplains will perform marriages, regardless of what they believe. So he has such an antipathy toward the conscience of others. It's pretty clear that his conscience toward life doesn't exist. 231 examples of promoting abortion, including killing children after they're outside the womb. That's pretty conscienceless, but that explains why he has so much antipathy toward the conscience of others.
And that's why it's so important that we stick to our biblical faith and we go to the Bible for answers to these questions, because look at the slippery slope we are on now.
Yeah,
we went from debating whether abortion should be legal to now infanticide. And look at the short amount of time that's happened. Christians really need to stand up and start taking a stand on these issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's not a shortage of issues to stand against
there
right
really
now,
isn't.
Unfortunately.
No.
I've never collected the file that I now have, and that's on the arrest of Christians in the last 2 years simply for standing for their faith. I never would have thought that in America we're going to have a 67-year-old man on a park bench in Georgia give out a gospel tract and face 2 days in jail, arrested for 2 days for giving out a gospel tract. Never would have thought Gideons would stand on a sidewalk in Florida and give out Bibles like they always do, but then get arrested and spend 2 days in jail for doing it. Never thought Pastor Mark Hollick would stand in Wichita, Kansas on a sidewalk and give out the Gospel of John and get 2 days in jail for giving out the Gospel of John. Never thought that a youth pastor up in Roseville, California would be walking through a mall, have an officer hear him say the word God to the two people he's walking with, tackle him in the mall, handcuff him, and drag him off for 2 days in jail for saying the word God in a mall. This is unbelievable stuff. And now we have groups like FRC and Liberty Institute that have come forward with 600 examples of this going on in our midst. They just a couple weeks ago came out with that. I mean, we are seeing the erosion of our liberties and freedoms in a way that none of us ever imagined would have ever happened in our lifetime, and it's happened just in the last few years.
That report, I think, is recommended reading for anybody. When I read that the first time, I was literally in shock. When you see all of it together in one document like that, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. I remember the first time that I started, I went onto a stage in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and had with me a stack about 1.5 inches thick of just one-page reports of who got arrested for expressing their faith. That those 11 Christians up in Pennsylvania faced $90,000 fine and 47 years in jail for carrying signs that had Bible verses on them. It was called hate speech. For carrying a sign, you're looking at 47 years in jail, $90,000 fine. I mean, that was unbelievable. The Calvary Chapel pastor out in Hemet, California, who simply stood on the sidewalk, opened his Bible, and read it, and got taken down by California Highway Patrol for reading his Bible on the sidewalk. I mean, I watched that stuff. I not only had the reports, I couldn't believe it. And then as Kelly and Tony and these other guys prepared this report and put it all together in one thing, it's almost overwhelming to read what's happened to our freedoms, particularly our religious freedoms, in the last 3 to 4 years. It's unbelievable.
And that concludes the first half of the Story of Liberty. Stay tuned for the second half, where we will continue our interview with David Barton of WallBuilders.
So I went to the leading expert in the country for original source documents during the founding era. David Barton has the largest private collection of Bibles and documents and textbooks from early America. I wanted to see John Hancock's John Hancock for myself.
What are these?
This is a family Bible done in 1798. This Bible was funded by about a dozen signers of the Constitution and signers of the Declaration, as well as by President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson. They're the guys who put up the financial backing to do this Bible.
Funded by signers of the Declaration?
And Constitution, yeah.
And Constitution.
Yeah, Gunning Bedford, signer of the Constitution. John Dixon, signer of the Constitution. You had so many of the signers who were part of this. Alexander Hamilton helped fund this Bible.
Because they wanted families together.
They wanted the Word of God out to every family.
Because they believed that would make for a better country.
Makes for a better country, makes for a better faith. And again, this is a product of our atheist, agnostic, deist founding fathers, or at least we're told that's who they are today. When you see this stuff, you go, wait a minute, these guys, why would any atheist, agnostic, or deist promote the Word of God, fund it, and want it distributed to every family and everyone in America? Why would they fund a Bible that you can take and give out to your neighbors to evangelize them? Doesn't make sense if they're atheist, agnostic, deist. Now, on the other hand, if these guys happen to be Christians, this makes a lot of sense. This is one of the rarest books in the world. This little book right here, really delicate. It's done in 1782. This is the first Bible ever printed in English in America. They printed 10,000 of them. There's 22 left in private hands. This is one of them. So one of the rarest books in the world. What's cool is this Bible, the Bible of the Revolution, was printed by the Congress of the United States. So Congress printed the first English language Bible. They said in Congress that this Bible is, quote, a neat edition of the Holy Scriptures for the use of our schools, end quote. So the Founding Fathers in Congress printed the first Bible in English, and they did it for the use of schools? I didn't think they wanted the Bible in schools. It's what we hear. It's what we've been told. The Bible was put in schools back in 1647, first public school law. We kept it in schools till 1963 when the court said, yeah, we've done it 320 years, let's do something different. And now we're told the Founding Fathers never wanted the Bible in schools. That one piece of history right there proves exactly opposite. Real simple.
So hold on. The United States Congress was commissioning and printing Bibles to be given to all the people because they knew that that's what would produce the character necessary to make America blossom and flourish and thrive.
Welcome back to the Story of Liberty. And now we're going to continue our interview with David Barton of WallBuilders. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, where you can join the conversation with other patriots fighting for the cause of liberty. Also, don't forget to check us out on Roku, where you can watch hundreds of hours of entertaining historical videos, as well as getting the news that affects your liberties. And now we will continue our interview with David Barton.
You know, David, the Obama administration, there was a national prayer day in Washington every May.
That's right.
And actually a Christian school from Florida went up there to participate in the events. And I think right when they learned that the White House actually would not get involved with this.
Yeah.
What happened?
It was a day started back in under President Eisenhower. He called for the National Day of Prayer. And he was very concerned that with communism growing on the rise, that people know that, hey, we're different from communist nations. We believe in God. They don't. So under Eisenhower, he had some God we trust to the currency, not just the coins. They built the Congressional Prayer Chapel over at the Capitol. Eisenhower also adds under God to the pledge. He sets up the Congressional Prayer Breakfast, and he has the National Day of Prayer starts. So that's been going since '54. And the White House regularly participates in the National Day of Prayer and issues National Day of Prayer proclamations until May of 2009, the first National Day of Prayer after Obama's in office, and they declined to host services for the National Day of Prayer. So, I mean, from the very start, he starts off in a brand new direction. After, President Clinton had National Days of Prayer at the White House, and President Carter and President Reagan, but not President Obama. He's not going to do that. But he does set aside a month for Ramadan at the White House. While he won't have the National Day of Prayer, he will have a month-long prayer period for Muslims, but he will not for Christians and Jews on the National Day of Prayer, which is a remarkable contrast, which is the other thing we've seen. He's hostile toward biblical faith, not all faith, because he's happy to do all sorts of Islamic things at the White House. He'll hold iftar dinners at the White House. He'll hold all sorts of religious events at the White House for Muslims, but he won't do that for Christians or Jews. And so, again, that's why we made the distinction of biblical faith. I can't say he's against all faith because he appears to like the Muslim faith at the White House, but he does not appear to like Christian or Jewish faith at the White House.
You know, David, what I don't get is I guess it's somewhere around 80% of the people in America profess to be Christian or Catholic, something like that. Now, is that true?
We have 88. We have 70 in the most recent poll. 78% of the nation identified itself as some branch of Christianity. So about two-thirds of that are Protestant, about one-third are Catholic, about 32% Catholic, but 78% says that they are Christian, and that's the way they identify themselves. The next closest faith comes in at Judaism at 1.6%. Then you drop to Islam at about 1%, and then it goes down from there. So there's nothing within 35, 40 times the size of what Christians are in the nation. And yet he will disregard the 78% in order to accommodate the 1%, which is pretty amazing.
That's amazing. I know he also, the White House and him, they shut out pro-life groups from attending a White House-sponsored healthcare summit. I think it was around the same time in 2009.
Yeah, they did. They shut them out. And you know, the other thing that I have to throw in on that, John, because this is just such a slap in the face. I don't think there's anybody in America that doesn't know that Catholics are pro-life. You know, I think that's fairly obvious. You know, everybody knows that. So the president, in making his nominations for State Department, continues to insist on sending pro-abortion ambassadors to the Vatican. And of course, they're going to reject that, and they have been. They've been rejecting the ambassadors he sends over because they're pro-abortion. I mean that's like saying I'm going to send Hamas to meet with Netanyahu. You know, it is so disrespectful. I mean, it is not even civil. And so, not only does he cut pro-life people out of attending briefings at the White House, he's not going to let you keep your pro-life beliefs if you're the Vatican. I'm going to send a pro-abortion ambassador to meet with you. It's nuts how far he's gone in that direction.
Well, yeah, like I said, he has become probably the most pro-abortion president ever, as long as I could remember. Very aggressive. He's trying to crush the pro-life movement any way he can.
Well, and it's interesting too because again, here's how far out of touch he is. You look since Roe v. Wade. We have 50 states working to pass some type of pro-life laws, and so you got parental consent, parental notification, you got informed consent, you got waiting periods, you got clinic regulation, abortion inspections, you got everything that is out there. You know, the unborn pain law, the sonogram laws, the fetal protection laws, the partial birth abortion. There's a ton of pro-life laws out there. The most pro-life laws we have ever passed in any 1 year in America is 35 pro-life laws. Now, that's given the fact you've got 50 legislatures and there's, 10 or 12 different kinds of pro-life laws you can pass. We've never done more than 35 in a single year. Then we had the election of 2010 where that particularly conservative Christians showed up and voted. They elected that big pro-life class I talked about, but they did the same thing at the state level. You know, in 2011, the first year after the 2010 election, we had 89 state laws passed. That's more than 2.5 times bigger than any other year. And then this year, 2012, we had 39 laws passed, which is bigger than any previous year except 2011. So the people we put in office in the last 2 years, I mean, they have done a great job of passing these now nearly 120 pro-life laws. And here the president is moving exactly the opposite direction from all the legislatures in America. And it is somewhat mystifying, except that it is philosophically driven. I mean, this clearly is not political, because if it was political, he knows what the polls say, and he knows where people are. He knows only 14% of the nation agrees with him on this, but he keeps pushing the nation toward that 14% direction rather than the other direction. So I agree with you, John. We've never seen a president in our lifetime as well. I can say in the history of America, because prior to our lifetime was, Roe v. Wade outlawed abortion, so we didn't have pro-abortion presidents then. So since Roe v. Wade, there's nobody he's an evangelist for abortion, quite frankly.
What's going on with how I read recently that we are actually funding abortion in China, like the forced abortion programs? I was trying to explain that to some of our listeners. Basically, we're funding a program through the UN. Is that how it works?
That's right. Yeah, the population funds that we do through the UN go into China, and they help fund that forced abortion policy in China. And it is forced abortion. It is mandatory, coercive. You have a second child, it will be aborted. So it's a forced abortion, and we fund that through the UN. And again, that's that problem with rights of conscience. But in addition to that, I mean, take what happened to Kenya. Look over to Kenya. Kenya, the pastors in Kenya's wrote a new constitution. Pastors in Kenya rose up and said, in our constitution, we do not want abortion. We ban abortion. And so the legislators in Kenya said, you're right, so we banned abortion. And then the State Department gets a hold of them and says, hey, we noticed you guys banned abortion in your Constitution. Well, I'm sorry, you can't get any more State Department funds until you take that clause out of your Constitution.
That's unbelievable.
It is. And that's how we're willing to hold $20 million or whatever it was out of Kenya until they change their Constitution to get abortion back in it. And by the way, Hillary Clinton, as part of this administration, created what they call the Global Office for Women's Issues. And she said that the two things that global office will promote worldwide will be abortion and homosexuality. Now, that's a global office for women's issues, and so we are now funding with our taxpayer dollars an office to go evangelize the world for abortion and homosexuality, and that comes right out of the State Department, and that's why she created the office. So, yeah, we're funding abortions in ways that people would not imagine. Forced abortions, forcing nations to change their constitution, and we're funding evangelists to go tell nations that they need to have abortion and homosexuality.
The fact that we are funding with our tax dollars for a woman to have her child killed against her will should be enough to enrage every single person with any moral standards in this country. I mean, that's such a violation of human rights. I don't even understand how we're funding this.
Well, and see, that's again where that even people who disagree with, even people who agree with abortion, a lot of them support conscience rights.
Exactly.
And now the activists in the field don't. I mean, NARAL and Planned Parenthood, those guys don't. But the average person who calls him or herself pro-choice pretty much is going to come down on the side of, but I'm not going to buy into forcing people to do that. And so even your average pro-abortion person is not that far gone that they say coercive abortion is okay, but yet that's what's being promoted by this administration. And that's, again, that's just one of so many lines that they've crossed. And, of course, the media doesn't talk about this because the media is so pro-abortion they don't see a big problem with this. But that's where most people do not know all the things that are happening in this administration that deal with these kind of values that most Americans would find reprehensible.
David, I remember, too, when actually it was probably just a few months ago when the Obama administration, they opposed legislation to protect the conscience of military chaplains. I have the privilege of being friends with Dr. Barry Black, the U.S. Senate chaplain. And,
what a great guy.
He's a great guy.
What an amazing speaker, too.
Yeah, and, but think about it. The administration comes out and basically forcing them to perform same-sex marriages.
Yeah, that's right.
Against their will. I mean, that's amazing.
Against their will. And that's what we did in the piece that we did on the web called America's Most Biblically Hostile President. We went through dozens of these acts. And the first category is acts of hostility toward people of biblical faith. Then we have acts of hostility from the Obama-led military toward people of biblical faith. Then we have acts of hostility toward biblical values. And then we have acts of preferentialism for Islam. And in that second category, the acts of hostility toward the military, that's one of the acts that we point to, is that, all right, chaplain, I don't care what you believe personally, you are going to perform gay weddings, period. And I don't care if it violates your conscience, I don't care if it violates your doctrines, you will do. Now, we've never coerced chaplains to do things like this, but we have in this administration. So as you look into the military, I mean, let me take you to Houston. In Houston, the Obama administration at the Veterans Memorial Cemetery in Houston National Cemetery, they forbid any references to God or Jesus during the burial ceremonies. And that is, you could not even say, God bless you. When you folded the American flag and gave it to the widow or gave it to the family of the veteran, typically those soldiers say, God bless you, ma'am, God bless you, sir. Couldn't do that. We could no longer use the word God or Jesus. And the guys who were praying the prayers couldn't do it. There are veterans groups that come in there to support the other veterans. They are there. A lot of these guys, World War II guys, we're losing about 1,500 World War II guys a day. And a lot of times they're the last survivor of their families. So there's nobody at the funeral, at the veterans' funeral, and there's always a group of veterans that will be there at that funeral. And if there's, 2 or 3 left in the family or whatever, they'll go over and comfort them and hug them and tell them God bless you. And that group was told it couldn't even say, this is a private group, couldn't even say God bless you to a family.
That's ridiculous.
Because it was on a government, it was supposedly, Obama says it's on a government cemetery, and therefore you can't say God bless you. It's just unbelievable what
that is unbelievable.
That just reminded me of something else that was in your article. I believe it's under the acts of hostility towards biblical faith. In 2009, when speaking at Georgetown University, Obama orders that a monogram symbolizing Jesus' name be covered when he is making his speech. What exactly happened there?
Well, Georgetown University, of course, is a Catholic university. And as a Catholic university, it had Catholic religious symbols up in its auditorium. And Obama, who had been invited to speak at Georgetown, said, I'm not about to speak in front of some religious symbols of Christianity. You cover those up if I'm coming in there. And so rather than coming into Georgetown on their turf and their grounds and saying, here, I'm going to speak to you, you're Catholics, okay, I'm speaking to you on your premises. He says, if I'm the President of the United States and coming on your premises, you're going to conform to what I want, and I don't want any religious symbol of Christianity. You cover that up. And so they did, and I don't think the Catholics would cover it up today. They did 4 years ago. They've been so pushed around. I'm thrilled with the backbone that they have developed and are standing up, and they're not going to be pushed anymore. But they covered it up 4 years ago, and that's one of many instances like that. He went from place to place, changing religious expressions, or even quoting the Declaration. 7 times he deliberately omitted the reference to God in the Declaration, quotes it but leaves the God part out because he doesn't agree with that.
It's, quote, endowed by their Creator. Why did he omit this part of the Declaration?
I haven't seen the comments, Lester, but I can assure you the President believes in the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights.
So that's crazy, and he won't say that the national motto is "In God We Trust." I'm sorry, that's established by law. No, he says the national motto is "E pluribus unum." That is not the national motto. That is the reverse side of the national seal, but that's not the national. But he says, it's not "In God We Trust." It's "E pluribus unum." I mean, he just won't even acknowledge God in traditional ways that we're used to most presidents doing.
When I was looking through your article, I was checking. It's all footnoted. You guys can find this article at wallbuilders.com. And when I was checking through it, I was looking through all the footnotes, and you linked to some really interesting articles and different pieces online that you can verify all this information for yourself. And I came to an article, I think it was CNN, if I remember correctly, about the military intercepted some Bibles that a church sent over.
Yes.
And they burnt them?
They burnt them. It was really interesting. We've seen what happened recently when the Quran got inadvertently burned over there, that it led to deaths and riots and whatever. And there was a church who sent one of their soldiers over there some Bibles, and that got intercepted, and they burned the Bibles. And nobody said anything about it. When it was said, they said, "Oh, no, you're not supposed to have those Bibles over there." So we make it, our military department, the Obama military department, says it's fine to burn Bibles, but how dare you burn a Quran? You can't do that. So, again, that's that preferentialism for Islam. But, again, for a church to send one of his soldiers Bibles and that ends up being burned by the military under the president, that's pretty amazing.
I had never heard about that, and that happened back in 2009, right? I think so. It happened, and I had never heard about it. I was shocked when I saw that.
And 2009 is when they burned the Bibles. Mm-hmm. And so the military burns the Bibles, and then in 2012, when the Quran was burned, the White House made a big apology for having burned the Quran, but said nothing about the Bibles except that it was right to burn them.
Wow. Well, David, we want to thank you for your time, and I know you're busy. You have another interview lined up. Is there any last thought that you'd like to leave for our listeners as we wind up?
Yeah, the thought I would put out there is the same thought that the Founding Fathers put out so eloquently. And it's put out by John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration, and Joseph Story, the father of American jurisprudence, and Jedediah Morris, one of America's Founding Fathers, who was an educator. And they said there is not an instance of civil liberty being preserved where religious liberty is lost. And so people who are thinking secular, I don't care about religious liberty, I just care about my civil, I'm a libertarian. No, you won't have your civil liberties if you lose your religious liberties. And so the acts of hostility that this president has exhibited toward biblical faith is indicative of what also happens to civil liberties as well. And the Founding Fathers went back and said there's not an example in history that you can point to where the civil liberty was retained and religious liberty was lost. And that's a message we need to understand right now. This is not about the economy. It's not about whether America is going to be a world power. It's not about jobs. If you lose your religious liberties, you will lose your civil liberties. And that's why I encourage people to get this piece and look at it, look over the documents. As Jen said, this is documented. See what this presidency has done, because that's a good indication of what's going to happen to civil liberties as well.
Thank you, David, so much. And you can get all this information at WallBuilders.com. What is it, David? www.wallbuilders.com?
WallBuilders.com, and on the search engine up front, just type in Biblically Hostile, and it'll pull up this long list and all the footnotes and documents.
And to make it easier for our listeners, we also linked it from our website, so you can check that out at thestoryofliberty.net as well.
Well, there you have it. David Barton, thank you so much for your time today, and Godspeed. Hope to see you soon.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for all you're doing to educate others. God bless.
God bless you.
Thanks for coming today. After hearing David Barton of WallBuilders explain the complete lack of regard and respect Obama has shown people of faith, to our country's founding principles, and to our God, can you honestly say that casting a vote for Obama is an excusable thing? No one knows how you cast your vote. It's private, and you have that right because of our God-given liberties. Remember what Jefferson said. God who gave us life, gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are a gift from God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and that his justice cannot sleep forever. Can we believe earnestly that voting for a man who has so blatantly rejected God, so publicly put our Lord and Savior down, and then excluded him from his rightful place in our country, can we really believe that as a country we are not going to receive God's perfect judgment for the rejection of him? Can we completely ignore the fact that we have removed him as the giver of our liberties? Christians and people of faith, and anyone who respects the right of the individual to practice religion as they see fit, voting for Obama is voting for the end of religious liberty as we know it. We have to defend religious liberty. Let's remember what Abigail Adams said. A patriot without religion, in my estimation, is as great a paradox as an honest man without the fear of God. It is possible that he whom no moral obligations bind can have any real goodwill towards men. Can he be a patriot who, by an openly vicious conduct in undermining the very bonds of society, the scriptures tell us, righteousness exalteth a nation. Remember that when you vote.
Folks, we also know that these statements made are true. They're factual. David Barton is the foremost Christian historian in America, highly respected, author of 40 books. So we invite our fellow Christians, Catholics, to examine the positions of Obama in light of God's word. Now, we don't judge Obama. That's God's work. Only God knows the heart of man. It's critical that people of faith cast their vote for those most likely to govern according to God's stated laws and principles. So if that's the standard we use to cast our vote, then no Christian should deny their faith and vote for a candidate that's for abortion and gay marriage. And you know who that is. Thank you for joining us on The Story of Liberty.
Well, it's not surprising then that they get better and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment, or anti-trade sentiment, and a way to explain their frustrations.